The wealthy businessman spent weeks searching for the mysterious boy who saved him from the bridge. When he discovered where his savior lived, he couldn't hold back his tears. The old fishing rod trembled in Marcus's hands as he made his way through the tall reeds. The autumn wind whipped against his face, and his worn backpack weighed heavy on his shoulders. School had ended 30 minutes ago, and like every other day, the 12-year-old boy headed straight to his usual spot by the river. "Don't be late today, Marcus," his mother's words from this morning echoed in his mind. The electricity bill came in higher than expected. He pushed aside another cluster of reeds, revealing the small clearing he'd carved out over the past months. The spot sat perfectly hidden from view, sheltered by the old bridge's shadow and surrounded by cattails. The water moved slow here, making it ideal for catching the fat carp that usually sold well at Mr. Peterson's market. Marcus dropped his backpack on the dry patch of earth and pulled out his tackle box. The plastic container had seen better days, its blue surface scratched and faded, but it still did its job. He'd found it in his father's things 3 years ago, shortly after the funeral. "You better keep an eye on that rod, son," his father used to say. "It's got more stories than both of us combined." The memory made Marcus's throat tight. He swallowed hard and focused on preparing his line. The afternoon sun filtered through the bridge's concrete supports, casting long shadows across the water. Marcus checked his phone, 3:45 p.m. He had about 3 hours of daylight left to catch something worthwhile. As he baited his hook with the worms he'd dug up yesterday, a car rumbled across the bridge overhead. The vibrations traveled down through the concrete pillars, a familiar sensation he'd grown used to over the past months. "Marcus Johnson, you better have your homework done before you start fishing," his mother's voice played in his head again. He smiled, patting the math worksheet tucked safely in his backpack. He'd finished it during lunch break, knowing he couldn't afford to waste any daylight. The first cast landed perfectly, the line cutting through the air with a soft whistle before the bait dropped into the water with a quiet plop. Marcus settled onto his milk crate seat, rod held steady in his hands. 20 minutes passed, then 40. The sun crept lower, and still no bites. Marcus adjusted his position, his school uniform shirt sticking to his back in the humid afternoon air. The sound of another car crossing the bridge drew his attention upward. That's when he saw him, a man in a blue suit, walking with unsteady steps along the bridge's pedestrian walkway. At first, Marcus didn't think much of it. People sometimes walked across the bridge, though most preferred driving. But something about the man's movement caught his eye. He swayed slightly, like someone walking against a strong wind, except the breeze had died down to almost nothing. Marcus lowered his fishing rod, attention now fully focused on the figure above. The man stopped halfway across the bridge, his hands gripping the railing. Even from below, Marcus could see they were trembling. "Hey, mister," Marcus called out, but his voice got lost in the sound of passing traffic. The man in the blue suit took another step closer to the railing. His movements seemed mechanical now, like a wind-up toy running out of energy. He lifted one leg, then the other, climbing onto the first rung of the safety barrier. Marcus's heart began to pound. He dropped his fishing rod and scrambled to his feet, nearly knocking over his tackle box. "Sir," he shouted louder this time. "Hey, stop!" The man didn't seem to hear. He was fully on the other side of the railing now, his expensive shoes finding precarious purchase on the narrow ledge. His blue suit jacket flapped in the wind that had picked up again, the fabric rippling like a flag. Marcus looked around frantically. The riverbank was deserted. No other fishermen, no joggers, no one. His phone lay in his backpack, but there wasn't time to call for help. Above him, the man in the blue suit lifted his face to the sky. His arms, still gripping the railing behind him, began to loosen. "Don't!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. The man's fingers released their hold. Time seemed to slow down. Marcus watched as the blue suit separated from the bridge's edge, the man's body beginning its downward arc toward the river's surface. Without thinking, Marcus was already moving, his feet pounding against the packed earth of the riverbank. His mind raced faster than his legs. The water was deepest about 20 feet downstream from where the man would hit. If he could reach that spot in time, the impact was going to be bad. Marcus had seen kids jump from the lowest section of the bridge during summer, and even that relatively short drop made a sound like a gunshot when they hit the water. He ran harder, his lungs burning. The reeds whipped at his face and arms, but he barely felt them. All he could focus on was the rapidly falling figure in blue and the spot in the water he needed to reach. Behind him, his fishing rod lay forgotten in the mud, the line still trailing in the current. His backpack sat next to the milk crate, math homework safely tucked inside. 3 hours of daylight left, and no fish to sell at the market. His mother's voice came back to him one more time. The electricity bill came in higher than expected. But none of that mattered now. Marcus reached the spot just as the man in the blue suit plunged into the river with a thunderous splash. Water erupted skyward like a geyser. And then everything went quiet except for the sound of Marcus's own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He kicked off his shoes, took a deep breath, and dove into the cold water. The world turned dark and murky. Marcus forced his eyes open against the sting of the river. Bubbles surrounded him, and through them, he caught a flash of blue fabric sinking deeper into the gloom. His lungs already burned, but he pushed downward. The current tried to pull him off course, but years of swimming in this same river had made him strong. His fingers brushed against something solid, an arm, then a shoulder. He grabbed hold of the suit jacket and pulled. The man was heavier than he looked, his waterlogged clothes adding extra weight. Marcus kicked hard, fighting against both the current and their combined mass. His chest felt like it would explode. Just when black spots started dancing at the edges of his vision, his head broke the surface. He gasped for air, still maintaining his grip on the man's jacket. The businessman's head lolled lifelessly against Marcus's shoulder. "Wake up!" Marcus shouted, struggling to keep them both afloat. "Please wake up." He began swimming backward toward the shore, using every ounce of strength left in his body. The current tried to pull them downstream, but Marcus angled their bodies against it, making slow but steady progress toward the bank. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Marcus's feet touched the muddy bottom. He dragged the man through the shallows until they were both clear of the water, collapsing onto the riverbank. The man in the blue suit lay motionless for a terrifying moment. Then his body convulsed, and water spewed from his mouth. He rolled onto his side, coughing violently. Marcus sat back on his heels, his own breath coming in ragged gasps. The businessman's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on Marcus's face. His lips moved, trying to form words. "Don't try to talk," Marcus said. "Just breathe." The man's hand reached out, trembling fingers grasping at empty air. Marcus wasn't sure what to do. Should he call an ambulance? The police? But before he could decide, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Someone must have seen the jump from the bridge and called 911. Marcus looked at the man one last time. Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them. A question, maybe, or an answer. Then Marcus turned and ran, water streaming from his clothes, leaving wet footprints in the mud behind him. He retrieved his backpack and fishing rod from his spot, hands shaking as he quickly packed up his tackle box. The sirens grew louder. By the time the first emergency vehicles arrived at the bridge, Marcus was already halfway home, his soaked clothes clinging to his skin, and no fish to sell at the market. The electricity bill would have to wait another day. Marcus's wet shoes squeaked against the pavement as he walked home. His clothes dripped with every step, leaving a trail of dark spots on the concrete. The late afternoon sun had started its descent, casting long shadows across the neighborhood's worn houses and chain-link fences. A police car sped past him, sirens wailing, headed toward the bridge. Marcus kept his head down and walked faster. "Hey, kid," someone called from a porch. "You fall in the river or something?" Marcus didn't answer. His heart still hammered in his chest, and his arms ached from the swim. The image of the man in the blue suit letting go of the railing played over and over in his mind. When he reached his house, Marcus stood at the door for a moment, trying to catch his breath. Water pooled around his feet on the welcome mat. He could hear the TV through the thin walls, another rerun of the evening news. The door creaked as he pushed it open. "Marcus," his mother's voice called from the kitchen. "That you?" "Yeah, Mom." She appeared in the hallway, still wearing her nurse's scrubs from her morning shift. Her eyes widened at the sight of him. "Lord have mercy. What happened to you?" Marcus opened his mouth but no words came out. His mother rushed forward, her hands checking him for injuries. "I'm fine," he managed to say. "Just fell in." "Fell in?" She grabbed a towel from the hall closet and wrapped it around his shoulders. "How did you fall in? Where's your fishing rod? Did you lose it?" "No, I got it." Marcus pointed to where he'd propped it against the wall. I just slipped. His mother's eyes narrowed. She'd always known when he wasn't telling the whole truth. Marcus Johnson, you look me in the eye right now. He tried, but couldn't. The sirens were still audible in the distance. There was this man, he started, his voice barely above a whisper. On the bridge. His mother's hands froze on his shoulders. What man? He was wearing a blue suit. Expensive looking. Marcus swallowed hard. He jumped. Jesus Christ. His mother pulled him into a tight hug, not caring that her scrubs were getting wet. Did you see it happen? Marcus nodded against her shoulder. I couldn't just watch. I had to help. She pushed him back, holding him at arm's length. You went in after him? Marcus, you could have died. He would have died if I didn't. The words burst out louder than he intended. His mother's face cycled through several emotions: fear, anger, pride, worry. She pulled him close again. You're just like your father, she whispered, always trying to save everyone. They stood there for a moment, the sound of distant sirens fading away. Finally, his mother stepped back, wiping her eyes. Go get changed. I'll make some hot chocolate. Marcus headed to his room, leaving wet footprints on the worn carpet. He peeled off his soaked uniform and changed into dry clothes, his muscles protesting every movement. When he returned to the kitchen, his mother had 2 steaming mugs on the table. The TV in the living room was louder now. Breaking news, the announcer's voice carried into the kitchen. Prominent businessman Charles Wellington was rescued from the river this afternoon after what witnesses describe as a fall from the 4th Street Bridge. Marcus froze in the doorway. His mother turned up the volume. Wellington, CEO of Wellington Industries, was transported to Metropolitan Hospital where he is listed in stable condition. Witnesses report seeing someone pull Wellington from the river, but the identity of the rescuer remains unknown. Charles Wellington. His mother sat down heavily in her chair. Marcus, do you know who that is? Marcus shook his head. He owns half the businesses in this city. The hospital I work at is on the board of directors. She took a sip of her hot chocolate, her hands trembling slightly. You saved one of the richest men in the state. I didn't know who he was, Marcus said. He was just falling. His mother reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We should tell someone. The police, the hospital, someone needs to know what you did. No. Marcus pulled his hand back. I don't want anyone to know. But Marcus, this man has resources. He could help us. With your school fees, with the bills. I didn't do it for money. Marcus stared into his hot chocolate. I did it because it was right. His mother was quiet for a long moment. Outside, another police car drove by, its lights flashing against the kitchen walls. Your father would be proud, she finally said. But he'd also want us to be practical. We're behind on the electricity bill, Marcus. The school wants money for your field trip next month. We can't keep pretending everything's fine. Marcus remembered the look in Wellington's eyes when they'd surfaced. Confused, desperate, almost angry to be alive. He wasn't trying to fall, Mom. He jumped. Maybe he doesn't want anyone to know what really happened. Understanding dawned on his mother's face. She reached for his hand again, and this time he let her take it. You're right, she said softly. That's his story to tell, not ours. They sat in silence, drinking their hot chocolate as the evening news continued in the background. Reports about Wellington's accident played on repeat, each version slightly different from the last. Marcus thought about the fishing rod leaning against the wall, about the empty tackle box, about tomorrow's trip to the market with nothing to sell. But when he remembered the moment of letting go of Wellington on the riverbank, he knew he'd made the right choice. Later that night, as he lay in bed, Marcus could still feel the river's current pulling at his clothes. His muscles ached, and his throat felt raw from swallowing river water. But every time he closed his eyes, he didn't see Wellington falling or the murky water closing over his head. Instead, he saw his father's fishing rod, waiting by the door for tomorrow's attempt. The sound of sirens had long since faded, replaced by the usual nighttime noises of their neighborhood, distant traffic, a dog barking, the rattle of the old heating system. Marcus pulled his blanket tighter around his shoulders and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would be another day by the river, another chance to catch something worth selling. Another ordinary afternoon in the life of Marcus Johnson. Except nothing felt ordinary anymore. The last thing he heard before drifting off was his mother's voice in the kitchen, talking quietly on the phone. "Yes, we can make a partial payment tomorrow. Just please don't turn off the power. I promise we'll have the rest by next week." Marcus clenched his fists under the blanket. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow he would catch enough fish to make everything right. But deep down, he knew that after what happened today, nothing would ever be quite the same again. The morning headlines screamed across every local news channel. Wellington Industries CEO in bridge accident. Marcus watched the reports from the kitchen table, spooning cereal into his mouth while his mother got ready for her morning shift. "They're calling it a miracle," his mother said, adjusting her nurse's uniform in the hall mirror. "Say he barely got a scratch." Marcus pushed his cereal around the bowl. "Are you working at Metropolitan today?" "No, thank goodness. I'm at the clinic." She grabbed her keys from the hook by the door. "You going fishing after school?" "Yeah." He didn't mention that his arms still ached from yesterday's swim. "Be careful out there." She hesitated at the door. "And Marcus? Maybe try a different spot today." But they both knew he wouldn't. That spot was the best place to catch the big carp that Mr. Peterson paid top dollar for. The walk to school felt longer than usual. Every newspaper stand showed Wellington's face, a corporate headshot of him smiling in his expensive suit, looking nothing like the man who'd let go of the bridge railing. "Did you hear about the bridge thing?" Tommy Martinez asked during lunch break. "My dad says the old guy probably had a heart attack or something." Marcus took a bite of his sandwich and said nothing. "Nah, my sister works at the hospital," Lisa Chen chimed in. "She says someone pulled him out of the water. Like a guardian angel or something." "Guardian angel?" Tommy snorted. "More like someone looking for a reward." Marcus got up and threw away the rest of his lunch. The afternoon dragged by slowly. During math class, Marcus caught himself staring out the window at the bridge in the distance. Would Wellington be there again? The thought made his stomach twist. When the final bell rang, Marcus headed straight for his spot by the river. The police tape from yesterday was gone, but he could still see traces of footprints in the mud. Emergency responders, probably. He set up his gear just like always, trying to ignore the memory of dropping his rod and running downstream. The water looked calm today, giving no hint of what had happened less than 24 hours ago. "Hey, kid," a voice called out. Marcus turned to see Mr. Peterson walking along the bank. "No fish yesterday?" "No, sir. River was too rough." Mr. Peterson nodded at the bridge. "Because of all that commotion? Heard some rich fellow took a spill." "Yeah, I heard about that." Marcus cast his line, watching it arc through the air. "Shame about the timing. Would have given you good money for a couple of nice carp. My customers been asking for them." Marcus adjusted his grip on the rod. "I'll try to catch extra today." Mr. Peterson watched him for a moment. "You know, there's been talk around the market. Some folks saying they saw someone swimming out there yesterday. Young kid, they said." The line went taut for a second, then relaxed. "Just weeds. Must have been scary," Mr. Peterson continued, watching all that happen. Marcus reeled in and cast again. "I wouldn't know. Wasn't here." "No." Mr. Peterson scratched his chin. "Could have sworn Mary from the flower shop said." "Just rumors," Marcus cut in, perhaps too quickly. Mr. Peterson raised his eyebrows but didn't push further. "Well, good luck with the fishing. Hope today's more productive than yesterday." As the old man walked away, Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The sun was getting lower, casting long shadows across the water. He needed to focus on fishing, not on yesterday's events. But then his phone buzzed. A news alert. Wellington speaks out about bridge incident. Against his better judgment, Marcus clicked the link. A video started playing. Wellington standing outside the hospital in a new suit, surrounded by reporters. "I want to thank the anonymous person who helped me yesterday." Wellington's voice cracked slightly. "I owe them my life." Marcus turned off the phone and shoved it deep into his backpack. Hours passed. The fish weren't biting. Every car that crossed the bridge made Marcus tense up, expecting to see another figure at the railing. When darkness finally began to fall, he had nothing to show for his efforts except sore muscles and damp shoes from wading too far out. At home, his mother was watching more news coverage of the incident. "They're saying he's offering a reward," she said as Marcus dropped his empty tackle box by the door. $50,000 to find the person who saved him. "That's crazy." Marcus headed for his room. "Is it?" His mother muted the TV. "That kind of money could change our lives, Marcus." pay off Dad's medical bills, maybe even put some away for college. I told you, I don't want anyone to know. Why not? You did a brave thing. Because. Marcus struggled to find the right words. Because he wasn't just falling, Mom. He meant to do it. And if everyone finds out, they'll know that too. His mother was quiet for a long moment. Come here, she finally said, patting the couch beside her. Marcus sat down, and she wrapped an arm around his shoulders. Your father used to say that sometimes the bravest thing isn't the rescue. It's knowing when to keep someone's secret. She squeezed him tight. But he also taught you to fish so you could help support us, not so you could carry the whole world on your shoulders. I'm not, Marcus protested. I saw his face. Mom, when we got to the shore, he looked so lost. Marcus nodded, like someone who needed more than just a rescue. Another nod. His mother sighed. All right, we'll do this your way. But promise me something. What? If he figures it out, if he finds you on his own, you'll let him thank you properly. Marcus thought about it. Okay, but he won't find out. No one saw me except maybe a few people at the market, and they're just guessing. Later that night, Marcus lay in bed listening to the distant sound of traffic crossing the bridge. His phone buzzed again, another news alert about Wellington. The reward had been doubled to $100,000. Marcus turned off his phone and rolled over. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to catch fish, to help with the bills, to be just another kid in a city too busy to notice him. But as he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, a man in an expensive suit was looking for him. And sooner or later, all the secrets thrown into the river would have to surface. A week had passed since the bridge incident. Marcus stood at his usual fishing spot, watching two men in work uniforms install a security camera on one of the bridge supports. Their utility truck blocked part of the walkway above, its yellow lights flashing in the afternoon sun. Fourth one this week, a voice said behind him. Marcus turned to see Tommy Martinez walking down the riverbank, his own fishing rod in hand. Dad says Wellington's putting them everywhere. Marcus focused on baiting his hook. What for? Looking for the guy who saved him, obviously. Tommy dropped his backpack and started setting up his gear. You mind if I fish here? My spot's blocked by the truck. Marcus shrugged. He'd never had company while fishing before, but Tommy had already cast his line. You hear about the reward? Tommy asked. 200,000 now. Man's desperate to find whoever did it. The amount made Marcus's stomach twist. That kind of money could pay all their bills for years. Somebody's bound to come forward, Tommy continued. I mean, who wouldn't want that kind of cash? Maybe they don't want to be found, Marcus said quietly. Tommy laughed. You're crazy. I wish I'd been here that day. I would have jumped in that water so fast. A sharp tug on Marcus's line interrupted Tommy's daydream. Both boys watched as Marcus reeled in a decent-sized carp. Nice catch, Tommy whistled. Mr. Peterson's gonna love that one. Marcus worked the hook free and placed the fish in his bucket. Above them, the workmen had finished with the camera and were packing up their equipment. Hey, Tommy said suddenly. Weren't you fishing here that day? When it happened, Marcus's hands froze on his fishing line. No, I was homesick. You sure? Because Lisa Chen said her sister saw someone that looked like Dash. I said I wasn't here. Marcus cut him off, his voice sharper than intended. Tommy held up his hands. Okay, just asking. They fished in silence for a while. The utility truck drove away, and regular traffic resumed on the bridge. Marcus caught 2 more carp while Tommy hadn't gotten so much as a nibble. How do you do it? Tommy asked finally. I've been fishing this river for months and barely catch anything. Just practice, Marcus said, but then felt bad for being short with him earlier. Look, you're casting too close to the surface. The big ones stay deep, especially this time of year. He showed Tommy how to adjust his weights and angle his cast. Within 20 minutes, Tommy had landed his first carp. This is awesome. Tommy grinned as he put the fish in his bucket. We should fish together more often. Before Marcus could respond, a sleek black car slowed to a stop on the bridge above them. Both boys looked up as a man in a suit stepped out and leaned against the railing, staring down at the water. Marcus's heart began to race. Even from this distance, he recognized Wellington's silver hair. Is that him? Tommy whispered. Marcus was already packing up his gear. Where are you going? Tommy called as Marcus grabbed his bucket. The fishing's just getting good. Got enough for today, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You can have my spot." He hurried along the bank, keeping his head down until he was well past the bridge. When he finally looked back, Wellington was still there, watching the river. At the market, Mr. Peterson weighed Marcus's catch. "3 nice ones today," he said, counting out the money. "But you're leaving awful early. Usually stay till dark, don't you?" "Got homework," Marcus lied, stuffing the bills into his pocket. "Well, before you go." Mr. Peterson leaned across his counter. "Some men were here earlier, asking questions about the bridge incident." Marcus's mouth went dry. "What kind of questions?" "Wanted to know if any of my regulars were fishing that day. Showed me some security footage. Kinda blurry." Mr. Peterson studied Marcus's face. "Told him I couldn't make out much. Water does funny things to a camera's view, you know." Marcus nodded slowly. "Thanks, Mr. Peterson. Don't mention it." The old man straightened up. "Just remember me when you're spending all that reward money." "There's no reward," Marcus said firmly. "Because I wasn't there." Mr. Peterson just smiled. "Whatever you say, kid. See you tomorrow." Maybe. Marcus wasn't sure he'd be going back to his spot anytime soon. At home, his mother was watching the news again. Wellington's face filled the screen, standing at a podium. "I remember the boy's face," Wellington was saying. "Young, African-American, probably early teens. He risked his life to save mine, and I won't rest until I find him." Marcus's mother muted the TV. "They're getting close, aren't they?" Marcus dropped onto the couch. Tommy Martinez was asking questions today, and Mr. Peterson said some men came to the market. "Maybe it's time to dash." "No." Marcus cut her off. "Please, Mom. Just, no." She sighed and pulled him close. "All right, but you can't hide forever, especially not with those cameras going up. I'll find a new fishing spot, and when that one gets cameras too." Marcus didn't answer. On TV, Wellington was still talking, his words silenced but his eyes scanning the crowd as if his rescuer might be there. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. Every car that passed made him think of the black vehicle on the bridge. Every shadow looked like a camera being installed. Even his father's old fishing rod, propped in the corner, seemed to be watching him. His phone buzzed. A text from Tommy. "Caught 2 more after you left. Same spot tomorrow." Marcus turned off his phone without replying. He got up and went to his window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Wellington was probably still searching, still asking questions, still trying to find the boy who'd pulled him from the river. A police car cruised slowly down their street, its spotlight sweeping across houses and yards. Marcus stepped back from the window until it passed. Tomorrow, he decided, he would try fishing downstream, past the bridge and its cameras. Past the spot where he'd dragged a drowning man to shore. Past the memory of that desperate moment when he'd chosen to act without thinking about consequences. But as he lay back down, Marcus knew he wasn't just hiding from Wellington and his rewards. He was hiding from the truth that had been churning inside him since that day. Some people wanted to be saved. Others needed to save themselves. And sometimes, keeping a secret was harder than diving into a river after a falling man. Saturday morning came with the sound of car doors slamming outside their house. Marcus was still in his pajamas, watching cartoons and eating cereal when his mother looked out the front window and gasped. "Marcus," she said, her voice tight. "There's a black SUV parked outside." The spoon froze halfway to his mouth. Through the thin curtains, he could see men in suits stepping out of the vehicle. One of them held a tablet. His mother smoothed her hair, still wearing her nightrobe. "What do we do?" Before Marcus could answer, a knock echoed through their small house. 3 firm raps against the front door. Neither of them moved. Another knock. "Mrs. Johnson," a voice called out. "This is Charles Wellington. I'd like to speak with you and your son, if possible." Marcus's mother looked at him, her eyes wide. The cartoon continued playing on their old TV, its cheerful music now seeming out of place. "Just a moment," she called out, then turned to Marcus. "Go put some clothes on. Quick." Marcus ran to his room, his heart pounding. He pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, listening to his mother open the front door. "Mr. Wellington, this is unexpected. I apologize for coming unannounced, Mrs. Johnson. May I come in?" Marcus stood in his doorway, watching Wellington step into their living room. He looked different than he had on the bridge, stronger, more composed. His suit was dark gray today, perfectly pressed. Two other men followed him in, security, probably, but waited by the door while Wellington approached Marcus. "Hello, Marcus," he said softly. "I've been looking for you." Marcus's throat felt dry. "Oh, how did you find us?" Wellington smiled slightly. "The new cameras helped. Plus, Mr. Peterson at the market was kind enough to finally confirm my suspicions." He turned to Marcus's mother. "You have an extraordinary son, Mrs. Johnson." She moved to stand beside Marcus, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, I do." Wellington gestured to their couch. "May we sit? I believe we have much to discuss." They arranged themselves in the small living room, Wellington in their old armchair, Marcus and his mother on the couch, the security men still standing by the door. "First," Wellington began, "I want to thank you properly, Marcus. What you did that day, it was beyond brave." Marcus stared at his hands. "Anyone would have done it." "No," Wellington said firmly. "They wouldn't have. I've watched the security footage a dozen times. Everyone else on that bridge just watched. You were the only one who acted." "The footage?" Marcus's mother asked. Wellington nodded to one of his men, who brought over the tablet. On the screen, grainy video showed a figure diving into the river, then struggling with something in the water. "The old cameras didn't catch much," Wellington explained, "but they caught enough, combined with witness statements and Mr. Peterson's confirmation." He looked at Marcus. "Why didn't you come forward?" "The reward dash. I didn't want it," Marcus cut in. "I didn't do it for money." "Then why did you do it?" Marcus finally looked up, meeting Wellington's eyes. Because you looked lost. Like my dad did, before." His mother's hand tightened on his shoulder. "Your father?" Wellington asked gently. "He died 3 years ago," Marcus's mother explained. "Cancer. The medical bills." She trailed off. Wellington was quiet for a moment. "I lost my wife 6 months ago," he finally said. "Cancer as well. That day on the bridge, I thought I couldn't go on without her." The cartoon was still playing in the background. Marcus reached for the remote and turned it off. "But a 12-year-old boy showed me something that day," Wellington continued. "He showed me that life is precious. That even when we think we're alone, someone might be watching, waiting to help." He leaned forward. "You didn't just save my life, Marcus. You saved my soul." The words hung in the air. Outside, a dog barked, and a car drove past. "The reward money dash," Wellington started. "No," Marcus said again. "Please. I don't want it." "Marcus," his mother began, but Wellington held up a hand. "I understand," he said. "You're just like I was at your age. Proud. Independent." He smiled. "But let me ask you something. Why do you fish by the bridge every day?" "To help with bills," Marcus admitted. "Dad's medical debt, school fees." "And how much do you make, selling to Mr. Peterson?" Marcus shrugged. 20, maybe $30 on a good day." Wellington nodded. "You're working hard to take care of your family. That's admirable." He paused. "But maybe there's a better way I can thank you." "What do you mean?" Marcus's mother asked. "I sit on the board of Riverside Preparatory Academy," Wellington said. "It's the best school in the city. Full college preparatory program, excellent teachers." He looked at Marcus. "I'd like to offer you a full scholarship. Through graduation." Marcus's mother gasped. "Riverside Prep? But that costs $40,000 a year." "Yes." Wellington smiled. "Consider it an investment in the young man who reminded me what life is worth." Marcus felt dizzy. But what about my spot? The fishing?" "You can still fish," Wellington said, "but maybe not out of necessity anymore." He turned to Marcus's mother. "And Mrs. Johnson, I've taken the liberty of having my foundation clear your outstanding medical bills." She put a hand to her mouth. "Mr. Wellington, we can't possibly dash." "You can, and you will." His voice was firm but kind. "Your son refused a reward for saving my life. But he can't refuse an old man's wish to help a promising young student." He looked at Marcus again. "What do you say?" Marcus felt tears pricking at his eyes. He blinked them back, remembering his father's words. "Sometimes help comes from unexpected places, son. The trick is being humble enough to accept it." "Okay," he whispered. "Thank you." Wellington stood, straightening his suit jacket. "No, Marcus. Thank you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. My private number. If you ever need anything at all, you call me. Marcus took the card, its gold lettering catching the morning light. The school will contact you Monday about enrollment, Wellington told Marcus's mother. And my office will send over the paperwork about the medical bills. He moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. One more thing, Marcus. Yes, sir. That spot by the bridge. Would you mind if I joined you there sometime? I've been told the fishing is quite good. For the first time that morning, Marcus smiled. Any time, Mr. Wellington. After they left, Marcus and his mother sat in silence, staring at the business card on their coffee table. The cartoon had ended, replaced by regular Saturday morning programming. Are you okay? His mother finally asked. Marcus nodded slowly. I think Dad would be happy about all of this. She pulled him close, and he could feel her tears on his shoulder. He'd be so proud of you, baby. So proud. Outside, the black SUV pulled away from their curb. Marcus watched it go, thinking about bridges and rivers and the strange ways life could change in an instant. Tomorrow, he'd go fishing again. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And maybe, just maybe, he'd have company, a man in an expensive suit, learning that sometimes the best way to save yourself was to let others help you do it. Monday morning arrived with a stack of papers on the kitchen table. Enrollment forms for Riverside Prep. Marcus stared at them while eating his breakfast, the school's gold crest gleaming on every page. Bus comes at 7:15, his mother said, already in her nurse's uniform. That's earlier than your usual school. I know. Marcus pushed his cereal around the bowl. Mom, are we sure about this? She sat down across from him. What's bothering you? It's just... He struggled to find the words. Everyone at Riverside Prep is rich. They'll know I don't belong there. Hey. She reached across the table and took his hand. You earned this. Not with money, but with something worth a lot more. Marcus thought about his current school, about Tommy and Lisa and all his other friends. What if the kids there find out about the bridge? About Mr. Wellington? Then they'll know you're a hero. I'm not a hero, Marcus mumbled. I just did what anyone would do. His mother squeezed his hand. Get dressed. We're going to visit the school today. An hour later, they stood outside Riverside Preparatory Academy's iron gates. The campus sprawled across several acres, with buildings that looked more like a college than a school. Students in crisp uniforms walked between classes, carrying expensive backpacks and laptops. Good morning. A woman in a sharp business suit approached them. I'm Mrs. Chen, the admissions director. Mr. Wellington called about you. She led them inside the main building. Marcus had never seen anything like it. Polished floors, lockers that looked brand new, classrooms with smart boards and tablets on every desk. Our class sizes average 15 students, Mrs. Chen explained as they walked. We offer advanced placement courses, robotics lab, 3 different languages. Marcus barely heard her. Through each classroom window, he saw kids who looked nothing like his friends from the neighborhood. Their shoes probably cost more than his entire wardrobe. And here's our science lab, Mrs. Chen continued, opening a door. Inside, students in safety goggles worked with equipment Marcus had only seen in movies. One boy looked up and smiled at him. That's David Wellington, Mrs. Chen said quietly. Mr. Wellington's nephew. He's in your grade. David waved. Marcus managed a small wave back. The tour continued, library, cafeteria, sports fields. Everything was perfect, pristine, overwhelming. Any questions? Mrs. Chen asked finally. Marcus had 1,000 questions, but couldn't voice any of them. His mother spoke instead. When can he start? We can have the uniform ready by Wednesday. Mrs. Chen smiled. Welcome to Riverside Prep, Marcus. Back home, Marcus went straight to his room. He picked up his father's fishing rod, running his fingers along the worn handle. You've been quiet, his mother said from the doorway. Did you see their cafeteria? They had sushi. Marcus set the rod down. Dad never even tried sushi. He would have, if he'd had the chance. She sat on his bed. He wanted so much for you, Marcus. More than fishing by the bridge every day. But fishing wasn't just about money, Marcus said. It was Dad's thing. Our thing. And it still can be. But now you can do it because you want to, not because we need groceries. Marcus flopped onto the bed beside her. What if I can't handle the classes? What if I'm too far behind? Then we'll get you tutoring. Mr. Wellington said he'd help with anything you need. That's another thing. Marcus sat up. Why is he doing all this? The school, paying Dad's medical bills. It's too much. His mother was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, when someone realizes they've been given a second chance at life, they want to make it count. She touched his cheek. You didn't just save him from drowning, Marcus. You showed him there was still good in the world. A car horn honked outside. Tommy, probably, wondering why Marcus hadn't been at their fishing spot after school. Can I still see my friends? Marcus asked. Of course you can. Nothing says you have to change who you are. She smiled. Just your uniform. Marcus looked at the Riverside Prep brochure on his desk. His new uniform would cost more than everything in his closet combined. I'm scared. Mom, he admitted. Good. She hugged him. That means you understand what a big opportunity this is. The next day, Marcus went to his spot by the bridge one last time before starting at his new school. The security cameras were still there, but they didn't bother him anymore. He was setting up his rod when footsteps approached. Mind if I join you? Marcus turned to see Wellington walking down the bank, dressed in casual clothes for once. Ever been fishing before? Marcus asked. Not since I was about your age. Wellington set down the fancy tackle box he was carrying. Might need some pointers. They spent the next hour fishing together. Wellington was terrible at it, but he laughed every time he tangled his line. My wife would have loved this, he said after another failed cast. She always told me I worked too hard. Forgot to enjoy simple things. Marcus helped him fix his line. My dad used to say the same thing to Mom. Smart man, your father. Wellington looked at Marcus. You know, it's okay to be nervous about the school. Marcus cast his line. That obvious, huh? David told me you looked a little overwhelmed during the tour. Wellington smiled. He's nervous too. You know, about living up to the family name. But he's rich. He belongs there. Money doesn't make you belong anywhere. Wellington reeled in his empty hook. Character does. And you, Marcus Johnson, have more character than most people I know. A fish tugged at Marcus's line. He pulled it in. A small carp, not worth much at the market. Nice catch, Wellington said. Marcus looked at the fish, then at Wellington. Want to learn how to clean it? Wellington's eyes lit up. I'd like that very much. They spent another hour by the river, Marcus teaching Wellington the things his father had taught him. When they finally packed up, the sun was setting. Thank you, Wellington said, for giving me back my love of simple things. Marcus watched him climb the bank, realizing something. Maybe this wasn't just about a rich man helping a poor kid. Maybe they were both learning something from each other. That night, Marcus hung his new Riverside Prep uniform in his closet. Next to it, he placed his father's fishing rod. Ready for tomorrow? His mother asked from the doorway. Marcus looked at the uniform, then at the rod. Two different worlds, but maybe they didn't have to be separate. Yeah, he said. I think I am. Marcus tugged at his tie for the 100th time that morning. The Riverside Prep uniform felt stiff and foreign. Navy blazer, gray slacks, polished shoes that squeaked when he walked. His mother had taken dozens of photos before he left, tears in her eyes. Now he stood at the school's main entrance, watching luxury cars drop off students. A sleek black SUV pulled up, and David Wellington stepped out. Marcus. David jogged over, his own uniform looking perfectly natural on him. Ready for your first day? Before Marcus could answer, whispers rippled through the crowd of students. That's him. The one who saved Mr. Wellington. I heard he's on full scholarship. David stepped closer to Marcus. Ignore them. They'll find something else to gossip about by lunch. The first bell rang, and Marcus followed David inside. His schedule felt like a foreign language, advanced literature, pre-calculus, Latin. At his old school, he'd barely started algebra. Don't worry, David said, reading his expression. Uncle Charles arranged for tutoring. I can help too. Their first class was chemistry. The lab partner assignments were already posted, and Marcus found his name next to David's. Good morning, class. The teacher, Dr. Phillips, began. Today we'll be conducting flame tests to identify metallic ions. She started distributing materials, and Marcus felt his stomach tighten. At his old school, they'd never done experiments like this. Here, David whispered, sliding the safety goggles toward Marcus. I'll get the Bunsen burner set up. As they worked, Marcus found himself relaxing slightly. The scientific method wasn't so different from fishing. Observe, adjust, be patient. Excellent work, gentlemen, Dr. Phillips said, checking their results. Marcus, have you done flame tests before? No. But David explained everything really well. She smiled. Well, you're a natural. Keep this up, and you'll do fine here. By lunchtime, Marcus's head was spinning with new information. The cafeteria offered foods he couldn't pronounce, but David helped him navigate the options. Try the poke bowl, David suggested. It's basically fancy fish. They found a table near the window. From here, Marcus could just see the river in the distance, and somewhere beyond it, his old school. Missing your friends? David asked. Yeah. Marcus poked at his food. Usually I'd be planning where to fish after school. You can still go fishing. Just because you're here doesn't mean you have to change everything. Marcus looked at him. Why are you being so nice to me? David set down his fork. Uncle Charles told me what really happened that day. About the bridge. He lowered his voice. After Aunt Sarah died, he was different. Distant. But after what you did, he started coming to family dinners again. Started laughing. He smiled. You didn't just save his life. You know. You saved our whole family. Before Marcus could respond, a group of girls stopped at their table. Is it true? One of them asked. About Mr. Wellington. Marcus stared at his food, but David spoke up. My uncle already told everyone what happened. Marcus is here because he earned it. End of story. The girls walked away, but Marcus had lost his appetite. Maybe this was a mistake. It's not, David said firmly. Look, in a week, no one will care how you got here. They'll only care that you're smart, you work hard, and you're actually pretty cool. He grinned. For a guy who spends his free time with fish. After lunch came the class Marcus had been dreading most, Latin. He sat in the back, hoping to go unnoticed. But the teacher, Mr. Romano, called on him immediately. Mr. Johnson, perhaps you'd like to attempt the translation. Marcus stared at the unfamiliar words on the board. His face felt hot. I've never taken Latin before. Instead of the mockery he expected, Mr. Romano smiled. Excellent. A fresh perspective. Let's start with the basics, shall we? To Marcus's surprise, Latin wasn't so different from the word puzzles his father used to give him. By the end of class, he'd successfully translated his first sentence. The final bell rang at 3:30. Students rushed to their waiting cars, but Marcus lingered, looking toward the river. Need a ride? David asked. No thanks. I think I'll walk. To the bridge. Marcus nodded. Mind if I come? Uncle Charles has been teaching me to fish, but I'm pretty terrible at it. 20 minutes later, they stood at Marcus's spot. Still in their school uniforms, David had borrowed one of Marcus's spare rods. Your dad taught you all this? David asked as Marcus showed him how to bait the hook. Yeah, we used to come here every weekend. Marcus cast his line. What about your dad? Investment banker. He's usually traveling. David attempted a cast, tangling his line immediately. Uncle Charles was more of a father to me, especially after Aunt Sarah got sick. They fished in comfortable silence for a while. The afternoon sun made their blazers too warm, so they took them off, rolling up their sleeves. Got one, David suddenly shouted, his rod bending. Marcus helped him reel in a small base. David grinned like he'd won an Olympic medal. Wait till Uncle Charles hears about this. Hears about what? They turned to see Wellington walking down the bank, still in his business suit. Uncle Charles, I caught one. Wellington examined the fish, beaming. Not bad for your first time. Though I suspect you had an excellent teacher. Marcus felt his face grow warm. He figured it out pretty quick. Like someone else I know. Wellington looked at their uniforms. First day go okay. It was different, Marcus admitted. But, good different, I think. Glad to hear it. Wellington rolled up his own sleeves. Room for one more. They spent the next hour fishing together. 3 people from different worlds connected by a river and a moment that changed everything. As the sun began to set, Marcus packed up his gear. His tie was loose, his shoes were muddy, and his blazer was wrinkled. But for the first time all day, he felt like himself. See you tomorrow? David asked. Marcus nodded. Same place after school. Wouldn't miss it. Wellington watched them with a smile. You know, Marcus, some people might think it's strange, a scholarship student teaching the owner's nephew how to fish. Is it strange? Marcus asked. No. Wellington put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. It's exactly how it should be. That night, Marcus hung his uniform back in his closet, mud stains and all. His mother was working late, so he made dinner and started on his homework. Latin vocabulary, chemical equations, Shakespeare. It was more challenging than anything he'd done before. But as he worked, he realized something. Just like fishing, it was all about patience, practice, and believing in yourself. His phone buzzed with a text from David. Thanks for today. Same time tomorrow. Marcus smiled and replied, bring your own rod this time. Then he opened his Latin textbook and began to translate, one word at a time, just like his father had taught him to untangle fishing line, slowly, carefully, and never giving up until the job was done. 3 months had passed since Marcus's first day at Riverside Prep. The crisp autumn air had given way to winter's chill, but he still went to the bridge every day after school. Sometimes David joined him. Sometimes Wellington. Sometimes both. Today, he sat alone on his milk crate, watching his breath form clouds in the cold air. The river had dropped with the winter weather, revealing rocks that had been hidden during the warmer months. Thought I'd find you here. Marcus turned to see Tommy Martinez walking down the bank, hands stuffed in his pockets. Hey, Marcus said. Haven't seen you in a while. Yeah, well, Tommy kicked at a frozen clump of mud. You've been busy with your new school. Your new friends. Marcus reeled in his line. The fish weren't biting anyway. Want to sit? Tommy hesitated, then dropped onto a nearby rock. How is it? The fancy school? Hard, Marcus admitted. But good. Different. Must be nice, Tommy said, his voice sharp. Getting picked by some rich guy. Marcus set his rod down. I didn't get picked. I saved his life. Yeah, and now you're too good for your old friends. That's not true. When's the last time you came to the market? Or hung out at the basketball court? Or did anything with us? Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't remember. Look, Tommy continued, softer now. I get it. You got a shot at something better. But you didn't have to forget where you came from. Before Marcus could respond, footsteps crunched on the frozen ground above them. David appeared at the top of the bank, wearing his expensive winter coat. Marcus, Uncle Charles wanted to know if you're coming to dinner tonight. His making. David trailed off, noticing Tommy. Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt. It's fine. Tommy stood up. I was just leaving. Wait, Marcus called. Why don't you both stay? Fish for a while. Tommy looked at David's coat, then at his own worn jacket. Nah, I'm good. Come on, David said, surprising them both. Marcus says you're really good at this. Better than me? Probably. Tommy hesitated. You fish. Marcus taught me. I'm still pretty terrible at it. David grinned. But I brought hot chocolate. He pulled a thermos from his bag. The steam rose in the cold air as he poured 3 cups. Slowly, Tommy sat back down. Marcus handed him a spare rod, and David settled onto another rock. They fished in silence for a while, passing the thermos between them. Eventually, Tommy spoke. So what's it like? Riverside Prep. David answered before Marcus could. Honestly, kind of stuck up sometimes. But Marcus is changing that. You should have seen him in the cafeteria last week, teaching everyone how to clean a fish. Tommy looked at Marcus. You didn't. Mr. Peterson gave me a good deal on some cap, Marcus said. Figured the cooking club should learn what real fish looks like. They all laughed, and something tight in Marcus's chest began to loosen. Uncle Charles loved it, David added. Said it was the best thing that happened to that school in years. How is Mr. Wellington? Tommy asked carefully. Different, Marcus said. Better, I think. He smiles more. He talks about you all the time, David told Marcus. Not just a bridge thing. He's proud of how well you're doing in school. Marcus felt his face warm despite the cold. His grades had improved steadily over the past months, especially in science and Latin. You know, David continued, he's starting a scholarship program. 4 kids from this neighborhood. Says talent shouldn't be limited by zip code. Tommy's eyes widened. For real? Applications open next semester. You should apply. Marcus watched Tommy process this information. You should, he agreed. You're smarter than me in math. Always were. I don't know. Tommy stared at the water. Just think about it, David said. Marcus could help you with the application. A tug on Tommy's line interrupted the conversation. All three boys jumped up as he reeled in a large bass. "Nice!" David exclaimed. "That's bigger than anything I've caught." Tommy grinned, holding up his catch. "Guess I haven't lost my touch." "Mr. Peterson would pay good money for that one," Marcus said. "Want to find out?" Tommy asked. They packed up their gear and walked to the market together, their breaths making clouds in the winter air. Mr. Peterson's eyes lit up when he saw them. "Well, look who it is. The Three Musketeers." He bought Tommy's bass for $30, more than it was probably worth. But Marcus saw how he looked at the three of them. The kid from the projects, the scholarship student, and the wealthy heir, all grinning like old friends. "Your father would be proud," Mr. Peterson told Marcus quietly while the others looked at his new stock. Not just of the school thing. Of this. Marcus understood what he meant. His father had always said that the river didn't care who you were or where you came from. It treated everyone the same. On their way back, Wellington's car pulled up beside them. "Need a ride?" he called through the window. "It's getting cold out here." They piled into the warm car, Tommy hesitating only briefly before climbing in. "Sir," he said as they drove, "David mentioned something about scholarships." Wellington smiled in the rearview mirror. "Indeed." Marcus suggested the idea. "Actually," said, "there were a lot of smart kids in this neighborhood who just needed a chance." Tommy looked at Marcus. "You did?" Marcus shrugged. "Seemed right." They dropped Tommy off first. Before getting out, he turned to Marcus. "Same time tomorrow." Marcus nodded. "Bring your own hot chocolate this time." As they drove away, Wellington spoke. "You know, Marcus, when I first offered you that scholarship, I thought I was the one doing the giving." He glanced in the mirror again. "I'm starting to think I was wrong about that." David squeezed Marcus's shoulder. "He's right. You changed things at school. Made people see differently." Marcus watched his old neighborhood pass by outside the window. The same streets, the same houses, but somehow everything felt different. "I had help," he said finally. "From both worlds." That night, as Marcus worked on his Latin homework, his phone buzzed with messages from both Tommy and David, planning tomorrow's fishing trip. His mother came home from her shift to find him smiling at his phone. "Good day?" she asked. Marcus thought about the bridge, about Tommy and David laughing together, about Wellington's scholarship program. "Yeah," he said. "Really good." 6 months to the day after the bridge incident, Marcus stood at his fishing spot, watching the sunrise paint the water gold. It was Saturday, and for once, he wasn't alone. His mother sat on his milk crate, wrapped in a warm jacket, while Wellington and David set up their rods nearby. Tommy was coming later, after his shift at Mr. Peterson's market, his new weekend job. "Your father and I used to bring you here when you were tiny," his mother said, sipping coffee from a thermos. "You could barely hold a rod, but you were so determined." Marcus smiled, remembering. "Dad would stand behind me, help me cast. Just like you do with me," David chimed in, struggling with his line. "Though I'm still hopeless." Wellington laughed. "Some of us are better at being taught than teaching." It seems the morning was cool but clear, perfect fishing weather. Marcus helped David fix his tangled line, then cast his own rod with practiced ease. "Marcus," his mother's voice was soft. "Look who's here." He turned to see Mr. Peterson walking down the bank, carrying something long wrapped in cloth. "Morning, everyone," the old man said. "Got something for you, Marcus." He unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a fishing rod, not new, but beautifully maintained, its wood gleaming in the morning light. "Found this in my storage room," Mr. Peterson said. "Your father left it with me, few days before he passed. Said to give it to you when the time was right." He held out the rod. "Think that time's come." Marcus took the rod with trembling hands. It was lighter than his current one, perfectly balanced. His father's initials were carved into the handle. "He said you'd know when you were ready," Mr. Peterson continued. "When you understood that fishing wasn't just about catching fish." Marcus ran his fingers over the initials. "It's about patience," he said quietly. "About helping others. About knowing some things are worth waiting for." "Exactly." Mr. Peterson squeezed his shoulder. "Your father was right about you. He always was." Tommy arrived as Marcus was setting up his father's rod, a paper bag from the market tucked under his arm. "Brought breakfast," he announced, pulling out fresh bagels. Mr. Peterson's treat. They sat together on the bank, eating and talking while the sun climbed higher. Marcus watched them all, his mother laughing at something Wellington said, David and Tommy comparing fishing techniques, Mr. Peterson telling stories about the old days. Oh, Wellington said suddenly, reaching into his coat. Almost forgot. The foundation paperwork came through yesterday. He handed Marcus's mother an envelope. Inside were documents for the newly established Johnson Memorial Scholarship Fund. 10 full scholarships a year, Wellington explained, for local kids who show promise. Marcus will help select the recipients. Me? Marcus looked up from his father's rod. Who better? Wellington smiled. You know better than anyone what it means to bridge two worlds. Marcus thought about Tommy's application for next year, already submitted. About the other kids in the neighborhood who just needed a chance. Speaking of bridges, David said, Uncle Charles has an announcement. Wellington stood up, brushing off his pants. Yes, well, the city council approved my proposal yesterday. Starting next month, they're adding a proper fishing pier under the bridge. Safe access, proper railings, the works. He looked at Marcus. They're calling it Johnson's Landing. Marcus's mother gasped. After a man who taught his son the value of helping others, Wellington finished. And after the son who taught an old man the same lesson. Before Marcus could respond, his line went taut. Everyone watched as he reeled in a huge carp, the biggest he'd ever caught. Now that, Mr. Peterson said appreciatively, is worth some real money. Actually, Marcus said, looking at the fish, I was thinking we could teach David and Tommy how to cook it. Maybe invite some friends from both schools. His mother wiped her eyes. Your father would love that. They spent the rest of the morning fishing, sharing stories, and making plans. Tommy and David argued playfully about who would catch the next big one. Wellington and Mr. Peterson swapped tales about the river's history. Marcus's mother took pictures of everything, especially of Marcus using his father's rod. Around noon, more people started showing up. Kids from Riverside Prep, friends from the neighborhood, even some of Marcus's old teachers. Someone brought a grill. Someone else set up music. The smell of cooking fish filled the air. Marcus stood at the water's edge, watching it all. 6 months ago, he'd been a boy with a fishing rod and a pile of bills to worry about. Now he was something else, not just a scholarship student or a hero or a bridge between two worlds. He was himself, only bigger somehow. Like his father's rod, he'd grown into something he was meant to be. Penny for your thoughts? Wellington asked, joining him. Marcus cast his line again, the rod feeling perfect in his hands. Just thinking about that day. About choices. Regret any of them? No. Marcus watched his line cut through the sunlight. But I understand them better now. Wellington nodded. As do I. They fished in comfortable silence while behind them, two communities became one, brought together by a boy who didn't see boundaries, only possibilities. Mr. Wellington. Yes. Thank you. Not just for the school and everything. For understanding why I didn't want the reward. Wellington reeled in his empty hook. Marcus, I've lived a long life, made a lot of money, helped build this city. But do you know what I'm most proud of? Marcus shook his head. That day on the bridge, when I was at my lowest, the universe sent me exactly what I needed. Not someone who wanted to profit from my pain, but someone who simply wanted to help. Wellington cast his line again. You reminded me what really matters. And that's worth more than any reward I could have offered. A cheer went up from the crowd. David had finally caught a fish. Tommy was showing him how to hold it properly for a photo. Marcus's mother was filming everything on her phone. Your father was right, Wellington said. About fishing not just being about catching fish. Marcus smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun, the weight of the rod, the love of two communities combined into one. Yeah, he said. He usually was. The river flowed on beneath the bridge, carrying their lines downstream. Above them, cars crossed over, their drivers unaware of the celebration below, of the lives changed by one moment of courage, of the barriers broken by one boy who saw past them. And Marcus Johnson, son of a fisherman, student of two worlds, stood at the water's edge, exactly where he was meant to be, not just surviving, but teaching others how to cast their lines into the future, how to wait patiently for what mattered, how to reel in something bigger than themselves. The fish weren't biting much that day, but no one seemed to mind at all.